My name is Christine Journalista. I'm the Neighborhood Services Manager with the Village of Oak Park. The Development Customer Services Department was started about a year ago to create a better customer service experience for people that are doing business related to real estate development or owning property, whether it's residential or commercial. So it ties together 4 divisions. The first one on the left-hand side of the screen is permit processing. They handle plan examination, they issue the permits then, and then they do the building inspections related to construction. So if you're doing any rehab or updates to your property, you'll interact with this permit processing division. Business services, they handle business licensing, they do the commercial inspections. They also, it's not listed here, but they also do a lot with the different business districts throughout the village in promoting and kind of coordinating activities. On the far right of the screen is the planning division, which I think is pretty self-explanatory, that they handle all planning activities, zoning, historic preservation. So if you have a historic property and you come in for a plan examination, come in for a permit, they'll also take a look at your construction plans. And then finally is the division that I lead, which is Neighborhood Services. It's a potpourri of programs that include housing loans and grants to single-family homes and small rental properties, as well as a multifamily program, large multifamily building program where we provide grants for small improvements. We manage the Federal Community Development Block Grant, which is about $1.5 million we receive from the federal government from HUD every year. And that goes to a number of things in the village, including public works, or like public infrastructure, social service agencies that provide homeless prevention services and education type services. And then also it funds some of our housing programs here. And then also we do residential code enforcement. So we do inspections of large multifamily buildings, of condo area, common areas. We do neighborhood walks. So we're looking at the exterior conditions of single family and smaller rental buildings through these neighborhood walks. So if you ever have a notice or an issue with any sort of inspection, that's Neighborhood Services, and you're welcome to get in touch with me and resolve issues. Our inspectors are really good, and they tend to, or they try to work with people to resolve code violations that they see. And then finally, we manage rental licenses, so which is why I'm leading the training here today. The new crime-free housing ordinance, which created the new small rental license, has a training component, and that's why we're here today. So without much further ado, I'm going to hand the microphone off to Cedric Melton, who's going to talk about renting in Oak Park and fair housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. Good evening to everybody. How's everybody doing? Okay? Thank you. That's great. You know, I see mostly all new faces I haven't seen before, so that's very good and that's very encouraging. So we're looking forward to this partnership with you as we work, both of us work to ensure that Oak Park remains the diverse and inclusive community it's known to be. So welcome to you once again. I'm Cedric Melton, Director of Community Relations. And Community Relations monitors the village's Chapter 13 Human Rights Ordinance. Many of you will hear it referred to as the Fair Housing Ordinance in Oak Park. But my department heads that up. I've been with the village for about 14 years. And in addition to monitoring the Chapter 13 ordinance, the department is responsible for several other things. And I'll give you a brief menu of some of that. In addition to the ordinance, we encourage block organizing, community safety, and multicultural training. We mediate landlord, tenant, and neighbor disputes, which may come in handy for you in the future. My cards are in the back. Each year, my department mediates about 450 landlord-tenant disputes, okay, around a lot of lease issues, personality issues, neighbor-to-neighbor issues. So we have had over 40 years of experience sitting between landlords and tenants, helping them work out issues that are disruptive to quality of life. So keep that in mind. I'm not wishing that on you. I'm not wishing extra work for myself. But that's something that we've been very good at over many, many years, the landlord-tenant dispute resolution area. We also provide resident training and community outreach. We manage the village's graffiti deterrent and removal program as well. So if you have graffiti on your buildings, you can give us a call. We'll help you work out your removal plan, whether that's with solution provided by the village or through our partnership with the Cook County Sheriff's Graffiti Removal Program. So we have excellent resources to help you get that stuff down as quickly as possible. That's the ultimate goal. Before I go over a few items of fair housing, I want to cover an issue that's very, very important for you as property owners going forward, and that is the mandatory provisions in your leases. This information is required for all lease applications and leases that you execute in Oak Park for property. Under parking, the night parking prohibition from 2:30 to 6 a.m., you must have that on your applications and your leases. You must have that on there. The unit number of the property or of the unit that's being rented. That's critically important for safety purposes, for school residency verification purposes. That comes in handy. The maximum occupancy of the unit that is being considered. You can't exceed the village's maximum occupancy code, and you may hear about that a little bit later on. The full name and birth dates of all occupants who will be occupying the unit. That's very, very important. Again, school residency verification for safety purposes. The name and phone number of the owner or management company that can be reached over 24 hours. Another important piece of information. I get a couple of calls a month with problems where people haven't included this information. And failing to have this information on applications and leases can result in an individual voiding their lease if you don't have that information on there. That's just critically important to have. And those particular requirements are on our village code. You can find that on our website, and I believe there may be handouts in the back. If they're not, I can make them available to you. But that's very, very important. The mandatory lease provisions, Section 12.3.11. Make sure you have that on your applications and your leases. Okay? So, let's talk about fair housing, this concept called fair housing. And this portion of the presentation is done in lieu of the results of the Hope Fair Housing testing that some of you may have heard that was conducted in 2013 in the village. And that testing revealed instances of discriminatory practices towards African Americans and persons with disabilities. And so we really want to make sure that all of us have an understanding of what fair housing is, some of the basics, some of the do's and don'ts. So I'll spend the next few minutes talking to you about that. But let's talk about what fair housing is. The technical definition of fair housing is the right for all people to live wherever they choose, to have housing, to have access to housing, seek, purchase, sell, lease, or rent, and enjoy the full use of their homes without unlawful discrimination, interference, coercion, threats, or intimidation by owners, landlords, or real estate agents, or any other persons. Okay? That's the technical definition of fair housing. Let's talk about a few facts about fair housing. Across the nation, each year, there are 10,000 plus charges filed, okay, in terms of fair housing discrimination. And the most common allegation occurs in discrimination in the terms and conditions of sale or rentals, which is where you as property owners, people who are leasing apartments, that's where you spend the majority of your time, dealing with terms and conditions of rentals and sales. Housing discrimination is perpetuated by other elements such as segregation, predatory lending, and gentrification. And federal fair housing law requires entities receiving federal funds, such as the Village of Oak Park, to affirmatively further fair housing and promote integration, which is why we're here tonight, and we're very excited to have you here, and again, look forward to that great partnership in Oak Park. Okay. Fair housing laws protect certain classes. And what are those classes? In Oak Park, the protected classes are race, color, meaning your skin tone. A lot of people get that confused and say, aren't race and color the same thing? No, they're not the same thing. Color refers to the actual hue or color of your skin. You can be dark-skinned or light-skinned and be discriminated against because of that. Religion, your sex, national origin, ancestry, age, which is 40 years of age and over, marital status, physical or mental disability, military or veteran status, unfavorable military discharge, familial status, sexual orientation including gender identity, order of protection status, and source of income. Now, I want to make sure I let you know that some of you, and you'll hear about this in a little bit about the Housing Choice Voucher programs, but in terms of source of income, there's a 25% affirmative defense for landlords or property owners who currently rent 25%, at least 25% of their units to individuals receiving Housing Choice Vouchers. If that's the case with you, you're not required to accept more. And you'll hear about that program in a little bit, but some people always question that when they look at source of income. And order of protection. You know, federal housing laws are trending to protect victims of domestic violence more and more, and they're looking for landlords to be more involved in helping to protect, not to be the police or the investigators, but to be more concerned and available to help with situations that may arise for individuals who are in order of protection status. So the laws are trending towards that. Again, let's talk about source of income. It's a protected category in Cook County and Oak Park. The Village of Oak Park passed its ordinance in December of 2013, so it's relatively new to us. Chicago has had source of income for ages. Source of income includes legal wages, alimony, child support, income derived from Social Security, federal or state public assistance such as TANF, temporary assistance to needy families, federal or state housing and rental subsidies, housing choice vouchers, or any other lawful compensation. That's protected status. Okay, let's talk about what constitutes discrimination. What is discrimination? On its face, discrimination is when you refuse to rent or sell housing, when you set different terms, conditions, or privileges, when you engage in steering, suggesting that an individual may be better served in another area based on their demographic or what their appearance looks like. That's considered steering. Refusing to provide reasonable accommodations or modifications for a disabled person. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And making statements that indicate a preference, such as, well, no children live here, or the building is mostly female and we'd like to keep it that way. You know, statements like that could land you in some trouble. Saying things like, we have a no pets policy, no matter if the person says or can prove that it's a service or support animal. And discrimination occurs when you don't have staff trained in the latest tools used to communicate by people with hearing and visual impairments. That's very important. I mentioned a minute ago, the HOPE testing revealed that deaf and hard of hearing individuals who were testers were hung up on 20% of the time they called to inquire about apartments. Okay? So you don't want to be caught like that. And so some of the best opportunities for training, how many of you glance at YouTube every now and then? It's okay, be honest, I do it. YouTube is an excellent resource for training for fair housing. They have modules, different scenarios, you know, just chock full of information. Have your staff, if you've got staff that work with you, have them review YouTube. The Illinois Department of Human Rights has trainings that are available. You can contact them via email or you can call the Department of Human Rights. They'll come out to where you are and conduct training in some instances. But make sure you give every tool available to your staff to know about fair housing. The other thing that's being implemented since the HOPE fair housing testing was done, and I've been talking with property owners and landlords, which I do every day, is that a lot of places are now adopting the 10-second rule when they answer the phone. That applies to individuals who use the tone deaf machines, the Pt.1 machines. A lot of people don't understand or didn't know that when a person with an impairment is calling you, there's another individual in the middle of that conversation with you who's actually taking and processing the information to get to you, a response to you. And so a lot of times people answer the phone, hello, and they don't hear anything for a few seconds. Oh, this is a telemarketer. You know, I've done it at home. You don't hear anything for a couple of seconds and you hang up. Well, you don't want that to happen. And several owners are now instituting the 10-second rule where they instruct their staff, hold the phone for 10 seconds. Because in 7 seconds, someone may say, hi, this is Melissa Jones, and I'm inquiring about your apartment that I saw in the Oak Leaves. Okay? You don't want someone to call and get hung up on. But that's one of the realities that people with hearing impairments deal with. There is a slight delay in the communication process. So think about establishing a 10-second rule when you answer your phone. You know, that gives you a lot of time to discern if it's a telemarketer. You might know that in 5 seconds, okay, and can deal with it quicker. So that's very important. And it's important to remember that a landlord does not need to have intent to discriminate in order to be found guilty of discrimination and to be hit with a charge. You don't have to be intending to do it. Lack of knowledge of the law is just as potent if you don't know the laws. So really get to that YouTube resource, get to the Department of Human Rights, give us a call here at Village Hall, my office, Christine, and we'll be glad to plug you in or refer you to resources that can provide some additional training. And we can provide training to you as well if that's something you'd like to do. Okay? Let's talk about who's bound by fair housing law. Any person engaging in a real estate transaction, landlords and property owners like yourselves, property management companies, condominium and housing associations, real estate brokers, salespersons, appraisers, agents of all of the above, and lending institutions, banks, credit unions and their agents, building developers and architects and their agents, insurance companies, newspapers, and municipalities. If you have someone that maintains your building, your janitor or your maintenance persons, they are bound by fair housing law if you allow them to show your properties to prospectives. So if you have a janitor or a handyman that every now and then does a favor for you and shows the property and takes the application and stuff like that, make sure they've seen some YouTube, make sure they've gotten some training, because if they say the wrong thing or do something inappropriate, and I'm not suggesting that, but if it happens, that person represents you and they're bound by the fair housing laws, and if they don't know, that can get you caught with a complaint. So make sure all your staff know that. Anybody working for you or representing you is bound by the fair housing law. Okay, let's talk about some examples of discrimination in rental terms, conditions, and privileges, which is where you'll spend the majority of your time as property owners and agents. Some examples are higher rent amounts and security deposits. The Hope Fair Housing testing done right here in Oak Park, good old Oak Park, showed that African American testers almost all the time were quoted higher rent amounts for the same apartment as their white counterparts, as well as higher security deposit amounts for the same apartment. Okay? There's no excusing that. That's clearly a problem that has to be addressed. Different rent amounts and security deposit amounts for the same units. Okay? There's no way to defend that. Differential treatment, such as repairs or lease violation notices. This kind of involves when individuals are in an apartment. A lot of people have the misunderstanding that discrimination only occurs when they're trying to locate an apartment and they're denied. But a person can be a tenant of one of your units and still suffer discrimination. We'll talk about that in just a couple of seconds here. In terms of repairs, if a person can prove or show that they've asked you for repairs that haven't been done, and they can prove that other people have received repairs and have received stellar treatment, and they may be of different persuasions, that may get an inquiry into fair housing. Why are you repairing everyone else, or why are you repairing other people, other people's units and properties, and you're not doing the same for everybody? So that can be an example of differential treatment in terms of repairs. Lease violation notices. If someone is receiving, tons of notes from the landlord about issues that other people do not receive, who may be doing the same things, that can get, spark an inquiry, and you don't want an inquiry. Sexual harassment or harassment. This is another one, and this happens not regularly, but on occasion. I get calls from individuals who say, I went in to look at the place and it looked nice, and the guy told me, well, if you've got time for lunch tomorrow, I can knock off 50% of your security deposit, or I can knock off half of your first month's rent. Okay? That's clearly sexual harassment. And if someone can corroborate that, if someone is with them and hears that, even if it's a joke, that joke will get you in trouble. So try to stay clear of that. And I'm not suggesting anyone here would do that. I'm sure you would not do that. Allowing tenant-on-tenant harassment. That's very important. If you rent to individuals who you know are intolerant of other races or other people or other lifestyles, and they do things to aggravate or persecute or bother those individuals, and you do nothing to resolve that, or you can't show where you attempted to mediate or resolve that issue, you can be charged with allowing tenant-on-tenant harassment. Okay, so that's very critical. Know your people. Try as hard as you can to promote positive relationships in your buildings, in your units. You know, we can help you do that. You know, block parties are a great way to do that. House events are a great way to do that. So make sure that you don't get caught sleeping by allowing tenant-on-tenant harassment, and that does occur on a fairly regular basis. I must say, I deal with quite a few of those every few months or so. Okay? So the ultimate goal is to be non-discriminatory, and instead of limiting people's options, we should try to expand them. You must treat all applicants equally. All applicants must be treated and tweeted, if they have computers, fairly. This applies to each and every landlord. You can't discriminate. Now remember, just because someone is a member of a protected class, that doesn't mean you can't deny them rental or evict them if there's cause for that. So don't feel paralyzed by that. Ask the question and make sure you're doing everything you should be doing in terms of your screening process and how you go about soliciting individuals. Remember, it only becomes discrimination if you do so because they're members of a protected class. And in order to do that, you've got to have a good screening process in place. And this starts with a good rental application. The application should include consent to run the person's credit, criminal, and rental history. It should provide that the person pay a non-refundable fee for those inquiries. But that's just the beginning. Make sure you get the full legal name of the individual that's going to be renting, the accurate social security number. They're doing frightening things with social security numbers now. So it's okay to ask for a copy of the social security card or a document that has their social security number on it to verify you have the correct social security number. That's very important. Verify their income. And remember, you can't discriminate based on the source. Those sources I talked about, you have to consider all that. Employment history. Check that out. Credit history, which is another hot topic. I always suggest that you kind of think about deciding on a credit range. Most people say, I'm only going to take people, and I've had owners tell me, I'm only going to take folks with 750 and above. That's it. If they don't meet 750, I'm not going to do it. Okay? That's not discriminatory in itself, but you want to try to get a range of people, because I've seen individuals with great credit who stink as tenants. And I've seen individuals with moderate credit who are the best tenants you could ever want. Okay? So instead of having that one, thing in your mind, consider a range. Consider 650, even lower if you want, because you've got to make that decision. But consider a range of credit that might get you a wider net of people that may be, the golden person you're looking for in terms of what a tenant would look like, an ideal tenant would look like. Okay? Criminal history, that's very important. Look at the types of arrests, not just the convictions, and think about what the person's record says about what kind of tenant they would be. Okay? Most people make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. So consider that. Look at the type of conviction and you interview the person. Talk to them about it. It's not illegal to talk to them about their convictions. Okay? This person is entering into a contract and a relationship with you, and you want to be comfortable that the person you're selecting is a person you can be, safe and happy with. Okay? So remember, the best way to be solid and consistent is to be consistent and be fair to everybody. Investigate everybody's employment, not just some people. I had a landlord just a week or so ago that called me and said, I made the biggest mistake. I didn't check her employment. She doesn't have a job. She rented to someone that didn't have a job. And now the person is in the unit, and they've got to go through the eviction process, which is going to take some time because they didn't check the employment history. So check that. The best way to decide on how you're going to have a perfect applicant, if there is such a thing, is to decide beforehand what kind of tenant you're willing to accept. Is a smoker okay? Is a smoker going to be all right in your building? What kind of past criminal history are you willing to accept? Will you allow pets? That's a big one. Will you take somebody that's filed for bankruptcy in the last 5 years? As long as you apply the same criteria to every applicant, regardless of the protected classes, there should be no basis for discrimination charges. Now let's talk for a minute about requirements for persons with with disabilities. Housing providers must make reasonable modifications or accommodations for persons with disabilities in rules, policies, practices, and services. Let's talk about the reasonable accommodations first. And these are examples of what the law requires if it's needed by a person with a disability. They may require a change in a parking rule if you have set rules in your property. You may have to change your parking rule. You may have to designate a reserved accessible parking space or work with our parking services department to secure a street parking spot for an individual that has easy access to the unit or the property. You may have to consider a different way for that individual to get their mail or pay their rent. Depending on their impairment, an individual may have a proxy, a person that picks up their mail for them. So you may, in that contractual relationship with that particular person, have to give a key to that proxy, who is the designated person to get the mail for that individual. Some people, depending on their situation, receive their income at different times of the month. So it may be that you accept their rent at the end of the month or at some other point in the month different from your current tenants. Those are some reasonable accommodations that are expected if the person is trying to rent from you and they have an impairment. Let's talk about reasonable modifications for persons with disabilities, which is different from an accommodation. The modifications are necessary if it affords the full enjoyment of the premises for the tenant. And the most important factor in all this is any modifications, the financial expense is the expense of the tenant. You are not responsible for any financial costs to provide a modification. The tenant has to provide that. And you may require the tenant pay into an escrow account to take care of those particular modifications as they're needed, if you phase it in, for example. Okay? Some examples of reasonable modifications. Adding support bars to the bathroom so an individual can position themselves in the bathroom or raise or lower themselves from the toilet. Removing doors temporarily or during their tenancy so an individual can get through the doors if they require a wheelchair. That's a modification. Raising or lowering the sink to accommodate a wheelchair. And adding an exterior ramp so the individual can get in and out of the property if they are not able to navigate or negotiate stairs or steps. Exceptions to no pet policies. There are exceptions for a guide, hearing, or support dog. You cannot refuse to rent or discriminate in terms, conditions, or privileges if a person with a disability needs a dog or has a dog with proper certification from physician or doctor or psychological entity. You cannot charge a pet deposit for an individual that has a dog for guide, hearing, or support. You can, however, charge for actual damages that the animal performs or conducts in your unit. And that's part of that whole escrow situation in the beginning. If they have a dog, you may want to figure in some dollars for damages when they leave. You are able to do that. Okay? So, how do you protect yourself? Again, learn about fair housing laws. And fair housing law is like water. I mean, it moves and shifts as situations move and shift. The best way to protect yourself, in our opinion, and certainly in my opinion, is to read as much as you can, watch as much as you can, get as much information as you can about fair housing law in Illinois. And check out other states, because other states have different requirements. Some states have some very interesting requirements. But go to YouTube, use that resource, an excellent resource. I can't state that enough. Have your staff do that. Train your staff and your agents and ensure they follow fair housing laws. Do something interesting. Treat them to lunch and, have a contest on who knows the most information on fair housing and have that person train your staff. Do those kinds of interesting things. Challenge stereotypes. Okay? That's a great way to protect yourself. Attend diversity trainings if you can. I mentioned the Department of Human Rights. They conduct excellent training on diversity and inclusion. They can come to you. They can come to Village Hall if that's something that you'd like to do as a group. we're willing to help you work that out and make that happen so you can get that training and be protected. Apply policies and practices consistently. What you do for one person, do the exact same thing for the other person. Don't deviate. And if you do deviate, make sure you document any deviation from one person to the other. Because if someone calls in a charge and you have to open your books, you're in a better position if you've got a note saying why you did this different from the previous person or the person in front of you. Tips for housing providers. Tell the truth. Keep good records. That's the biggest thing I can think of. Keep good records. Document your actions. Document your deviations. Have stated policies and practices and follow them consistently. You know, on your applications, you know, if application deposits are non-refundable, if an apartment is accepted, have that written in, write in your policy so there's no question about what the situation is, okay? And document reasons for deviations from any policies. And, you know, the final thing I would say is to make sure you're 100% safe, assume that everybody coming to your location, assuming everybody writing you, assume everybody calling you is a tester, okay? Assume that everybody coming to you starting tomorrow is a tester, and you'll be on your P's and Q's. You'll be doing the exact same thing for everybody, giving everyone the same exact consideration for the unit, and you should be okay. All right? So thank you for your time.